Just firstly, thank you for coming out today, because I know the weather is freezing and it's not particularly nice out there. So thank you for coming to our open forum event. Most of you should know me. My name is Daniel and I'm the Citizen Science Officer. And I'm just going to very quickly introduce the event and then hand over to all of our speakers today, because you don't want to listen to me going on. So we've got our toilets out there. If you haven't already been shown them, hopefully you've been welcome to show them. And I don't believe there is any fire drills today, but if there is, there's our emergency exit is over there and then through these doors and out the front there, and we'll all meet in the car park and do a little, make sure everyone's there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah Jane, our CEO, to chair the event today. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you, Daniel. As always with these things, I have to make it a bit shorter for me. I just wanted to again also echo what Daniel said, and thank you all for coming out today. It's really great to see so many people. So very welcome to East Horsley Village Hall on a slightly chilly day, but to hear about what is a really exciting project. I also just wanted to thank you all for getting involved in the project. We can't do the things that we need to do without all of your involvement, and we are always appreciative of that, so thank you very much for that. Space4Nature is a really exciting project. It sort of originated, Richard and I had a few conversations probably about 3 years ago now about an opportunity that had come up with the People's Postcode Lottery Dream Fund funding. And, you know, those sorts of funds are really interesting when they come up, because they want to be able to experience the passion and the belief that you have in the project in order to give you the funding. So actually for us, that was really good fit, because both Richard and I, you know, went and stood at Queen Meadows and did some introductory video materials for it. And for both of us, we're very passionate about this particular area of work. And in essence, I think for me, what's unique about Space4Nature is it is making use of technology in the form of satellites that you'll hear about, in the form of machine learning, AI, but that is bedded very deeply with validation on the ground by citizen scientist volunteers. And that's really, really important, because that validation piece, the going out and looking at land, will always remain an important part of what we need to do. But by then utilising technology as that evolves, I think that gives us the best of both worlds. So that's one of the reasons why this project is so exciting for us, because it potentially helps us to be able to do so much more, not just now but in the future, both in terms of monitoring the impact that we're having, but also looking at where we need to make interventions. So I hope you enjoy the talks today. I also just wanted to say the way we're going to run it is a suite of talks, literally one after the other, about 10 minutes each, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A session. So if you'd be kind enough to hold your questions, I'm sure there will be lots, and then I'll put those to the panel at the end. So I hope that all sounds okay to you, and I'm going to hand over to Andrew Jamieson first of all, who is the project manager for Space4Nature. Thanks, Andrew.
Yes, hello everybody, my name is Andrew Jamieson. I'm the project manager for Space4Nature. I've been with the Wildlife Trust for a long time, and it's a fantastic project to be involved with. I'm just going to sort of set the scene really for the speakers that follow and give something of an overview and a context to how we got to where we are today. So next slide please. I think I'll probably be right in saying that everybody in this room shares the kind of aspiration that we have here, that we, in terms of nature in Surrey and beyond, we need more sites for nature. We need them to be bigger, we need them to be better quality, and we need joined up connectivity in the landscape. What that kind of throws up is a number of challenges for us, particularly around data, to plan and deliver and monitor a nature recovery network in the county. And how do we obtain that data, and how do we have it at a scale and the immediacy that meets the scale of the challenge that we face in terms of nature in Surrey? And what tools do we have? And that really kind of leads us down the path of what's the best use we can make of technology. Which brings us to Space4Nature, and at the heart of Space4Nature is the research and technology aspect, and it's all about the data. It's collecting the data from the very high resolution Earth observation satellites, which we'll be hearing more from Richard and Anna about shortly. But it's combining it with the fantastic citizen science work that's happening now as part of the project. And then layering that with other existing surveys that we have, whether it's a site-based survey data or whether it's sort of across the county. And it's sort of supplementing that also with expert knowledge that we might have within the Wildlife Trust and within partner organisations and so on. And then the third aspect to it is that kind of data processing and analysis, bringing in those additional variables, which we'll be hearing more about shortly, and sort of linking the image and the habitat classification, which is at the heart of this. And then the ongoing process of the iterative process we're in at the moment of verifying the information, leading to almost telling the technology what it's seeing. And ultimately our goal is that we have a remote tool that can detect habitat at fine enough detail that will really inform decision making about where we do habitat creation and restoration. Just to go into the citizen science a little bit more, for those people who perhaps haven't been involved this year, just want to understand a bit more about, I guess, the methodology. As Sarah Jane said, it's absolutely crucial that we do the ground truthing in this process, and that's where the citizen science programs come in. And it's very much an on-the-ground record of the habitat to inform machine learning. And the way that we've done it, and which many of you in the room will have been using this year, is an app on Survey 123 at some test sites on both chalk grassland and lowland heath habitats. And our test sites have been at Quarry Hangers Nature Reserve, Chobham Common National Nature Reserve, and Putnam Common, which is part of the Hampton Estate. And the app takes you through different aspects of the habitat, indicator species, non-target species, condition, and that kind of thing. So this year it really has been fantastic to kind of launch into a project like this, which is sort of kind of new territory for us. It's been fantastic to have had 130 volunteers come through the training, more or less that number. We've had 360 data points collected across the 3 test sites, and now we're adding it to those other ecological data sets. And I want to say a specific thank you actually to Simon Humphreys, who provided some really fantastic data from several years ago about chalk grassland across the county, but also some other specific data relating to Dorking Nature Reserve. And a huge thank you, as Sarah Jane said, to everybody who's been involved so far. It's been a fantastic effort, and you know, it's given us such a great basis to go forward as we look at next year's programme. It is a very multifaceted project, Space4Nature. It isn't just about the technology. There's all these other aspects which you'll be hearing about more about shortly. It's been great working with Buglife this year on their Beelines programme. We'll be hearing more from Louis about that. It's got the paleo-ecology side of it, the research into sort of past environments in Surrey. And you'll be hearing more from Ben Siggery about that as well this morning, albeit he's not here in person. He's not being beamed by satellite, but he's recorded a video which you'll be seeing. And people engagement, engaging with different audiences is really a big part of it. There's a Wilder Schools programme where our colleagues in Wilder Schools programme are going out to schools and using satellite imagery to look at their school grounds and sort of talking to the pupils about what are the options for habitat creation and restoration within your school grounds that would meet the sort of landscape connectivity, you know, in your area. So that's been great to see. And we've been running events as well. We'll be running more events next year. We've had the Earth Search BioBlitz event at Painshill Park, which is a really good opportunity to engage with a different kind of audience in recording for nature. It's always been a big part of the project to think about the legacy and how we scale up. And over the past year or so, we've got into some really good conversations with other organisations, looking at some of the potential for scaling up to other habitats, working with other organisations sort of beyond the boundaries of the county. We've got links into Space South Central, which are very much sort of geared towards supporting innovation in space technology, and through that the project has got accreditation for the Space to Climate Observatory. Most of all, we really want to come up with a tool that's going to be usable in the real world, and we've been working with the Land app, and it's great that Ben from the Land app's here today to explain what the Land app is and what that platform provides. We've got a fantastic constituency of landowners across the country and beyond that give us a great kind of opportunity to make Space4Nature a tool that can be actually used for real kind of interventions for nature. And we've been talking to the Ecosystems Knowledge Network as well to kind of reinforce that whole networking aspect of the project. Next slide there, please. So what's next? So at the moment you find us in the midst of kind of crunching a lot of data and processing everything that's gone on this year really, and Richard and Anna will be talking a bit more about that. And looking at how the predictive modelling of habitats is going based on the data that's been collected to date. And sort of connected to that very much is the discussions we're starting to have about how that leads into what we do next year. So that will be sort of what sites will be surveyed, what habitats we'll be looking at, what the methodologies will be. And we're also looking at other habitats beyond the heathland and grassland that chalk grassland we looked at this year. The other aspects are all very much ongoing, so there'll be more of Ben's work on the paleoecology, the pollinator work that Louis is doing will be ongoing across the year and beyond, and we'll be doing more work with schools and other engagement events as well. There'll be probably another BioBlitz that we'll be hearing about. What does this all mean ultimately for nature in the county? Next one. So just to finish, just to really re-emphasise, we're looking for a usable tool to deliver and monitor Surrey's nature recovery network. We want to do stuff on the ground, and Louis is absolutely doing that with the pollinator work, which you'll be hearing about. We want to know more about Surrey's ecological past. That's where the paleoecology comes in, and that will inform how we set our objectives about how nature in Surrey should be, so that we've got a firm kind of view of where we want to be and a tool alongside it to sort of monitor our progress towards that. And obviously we want more people like yourselves to get involved and also to sort of pick up that wider biological recording army of people out there enthusiastic about nature and sort of recording nature to sort of feed into this whole process sort of long term into the future. And I think the profile of the project really, I think, gives us a good platform for making the sort of a wider public awareness of the importance of connectivity in nature recovery in the county.
Graham, thanks very much, Andrew. And again, thank you also from me. It's great to see so many people here. It's actually nice to be here ourselves. So I'd like to introduce my colleague and friend Anna Andrews as well. So we're both working on this together. And Anna's the brains behind the operation. I just sort of have sort of a nice overview of it, which I hope to give you here. So, as I said earlier, what we're doing is using some of the new power of very high resolution satellite Earth observation and trying to make use of that for nature recovery. And one of the reasons we came to this thinking in collaboration with the Wildlife Trust and the other partners is because my university, Surrey, University of Surrey, is well known and was one of the instigators of these very small cube satellites. We've brought one with us here. It's a replica, but you get the sense of the scale of it and so on. Those are the things that are flying around about 400 kilometers up in the sky, capturing the images that we're making use of for this nature recovery project. So the image is really quite correct. Next one, please. Thanks. We did some work in the AONB, the National Landscape, over the last few years. Anna studied this area for her PhD with us at Surrey, and we were able to show that it was possible to really map and investigate habitats at a very high degree of resolution and granularity. We can see objects down to about 0.5 or 0.3 of a metre now using those sorts of satellites from those distances. That gives us a huge step up in what we had previously been able to do, perhaps 5 years or 10 years ago, where the resolutions were sort of 10 metres. And therefore the classification of habitat was rather lumpy. You know, it was a grassland or a coniferous woodland. It was good at that. Now we can actually look at the really fine details of these habitats, and what that opens up is opportunity for those involved in real nature conservation to plan the locations and the interventions that are going to give the highest amount of benefit, I think. I think it really does make a fantastic change. Essentially the problem is there are just not enough qualified ecologists of the sort of calibre of Mike Wade and Louis here and things like that to be able to do the coverage that we'd like to have. So we want to harness these sorts of tools to assist them and the conservation planners to be able to know where best to put the efforts. And that's the overall purpose. Next, please. So these are our aims, is to use this emerging power of satellite imagery to support nature recovery by providing county-wide, highly detailed coverage of the distributions and the connectivity or the fragmentation of key habitats. Andrew's mentioned several. New data and insights on nature recovery planning and for the widespread and routine monitoring of how those recovery programs are going. There are something like 800 sites of nature conservation in Surrey. They all need monitoring too. They're meant to be monitored about every 6 years. And we know we're not achieving that. We've looked at some of them with this sort of technology, and it looks like it can certainly add something to really help with that initiative. And also, as mentioned by Andrew, we want to transform this new capability as a tool to enable better work to be done and more work to be done on this nature conservation by the wildlife trusts and others. So, next please. So I won't spend too long on this, but essentially we use a sort of 4-step process to do our research. And what we're doing is research. We're here working with the partnership to demonstrate that this type of Earth observation technology and the machine learning and the artificial intelligence that can go alongside it really can do this job. So we really want to know, can it do it or can't it? And that's why it's so brilliant to be working with the Wildlife Trust, on-the-ground ecologists and the citizen scientists, because that question is the one that we'll be able to answer in Space4Nature. So we combine very high resolution satellite data with ordinary sort of satellite data, 10 or 30 meters, citizen science data, and the expert knowledge, expert and landowner knowledge. So all those things have to come together. We process the data, so sort of integrating those different pieces of information. We train computer-based artificial intelligence machine learning systems and algorithms to calculate vegetation and water indices and to understand and to actually, one of the big advantages of artificial intelligence is it can bring out things from imagery that we don't see ourselves. I'm not saying it's more intelligent than us, because but we tend to look for the things we look for, and we know and we recognise and we kind of calibrate on that basis. But the AI can go a step further and can integrate things that it can see in the imagery that are not necessarily very obvious to us, and that also increases the power of the system. So that sits in the data analysis, and then the ultimate point is the results and the uses of that information. So we cross-check with other Earth observation products, verify the accuracy, including the ground truth thing, and you'll see an example of that in a few minutes. So it's a pretty straightforward process, to be perfectly honest, but it's very painstaking, and Anna and some of our best students are working on this right now and doing a fantastic job. Next one, please. So I'll show you an example here. You can't see it terribly well, and the screen's too far away for me to use the pointer on the end of my arm. But you might see some sort of black squares and blobs in there. That's actually at the Quarry Hangers site. Some of you will recognise the M25 on the road to Brighton. But we're using that as a test site with quadrats on it, and combining that, the knowledge we got from the quadrats and the history of the site and so on, which is very detailed, to combine it with what Anna and her colleagues can see in terms of the Earth, very high resolution Earth observation for those exact locations. So that's what we're pulling together here and using it as a kind of calibration site for chalk grassland. And then, next slide please. Then what Anna's done is to expand out from that to say that's what our machine learning understands as being chalk grassland. And it's looked then, using imagery for the whole of the county, it's looked across the county and say, where is there examples of chalk grassland? And it's shown in red here. And you can see there's lots of spottiness down in the southeast of the county. It spans across as well. It's largely where you would expect it to be, but there would appear to us to be a lot more of it, especially in small amounts, than we had previously understood. That's our understanding, not necessarily Mike Waite's or the Wildlife Trust. Next slide, please. So one back, thanks. You can't see it very well, but you might notice on the habitat classification and the index, you can see sites visited between 2018 and 2020 are shown in purple boxes. And I'm sorry it's so far away, but there are a whole set of these purple boxes dotted around in the county that have been, where it's been verified that we know that there is chalk grassland here. And the alignment of what the Space4Nature machine learning is showing as being chalk grassland and those sites that have been walked on the ground and are identified as chalk grassland is pretty good. I would say very good, but we're still really working on that. We can look at a slightly more detailed example now. So again, this is based just on the calibration set from quarry hangers. This is one location. You can see some of these purple sort of polygons or boxes. Red shows places where our algorithm shows there to be chalk grassland from the training that we've done with it. And you can see that in most of the purple boxes, there are quite large areas of chalk grassland identified, and chalk grassland is identified in places which haven't actually been walked or investigated. But we see it as being there, using exactly the same criteria. I think another thing that's apparent from this is that there are lots of patches of this type of habitat. They're somewhat dispersed, dotted around, and so that enables some new thinking to take place of how might you want to connect together, what might be the best routes to connect together some of this sort of spotty picture. Next, please. And this is another example of the same. It's actually at Lambarn Farm and Hugh Brim's farm, isn't it, near Westcott. The sort of curvy thing is the railway line that runs from Dorking to Guildford. But again, a very similar picture. You can see that areas delimited in the purple boxes, the polygons, multi-shaped things, are being seen as having chalk grassland there, and that aligns extremely well with the verification on the ground. So there's lots of scope to do a great deal more on this. We are testing the quality of this type of work at the moment ourselves as part of the research. And the next one, please. Thank you. So for our next step, we want to do, the penny's dropped. That's good. For our next work, we want to do more quarry hangers because there's more diversity in that site as well, and we want to cover it. We've only used it as the calibration site. We'd like to have some other sites we use for calibration as well, so that we're really covering the sort of nuances of what we might classify as chalk grassland. We've extended the work to heathlands at Chobham and Putnam. We're doing further work on Painshill. Some of you might recognise Painshill Park there. You can see the lake, the vineyard, and the woodland, and we've done that again with a very talented master's student at Surrey, and we've actually calibrated the carbon footprint of the landscape there as well, and also the cafe, by the way, so if anyone can tell you the carbon footprint of the sticky bun and coffee at the end. One of the really exciting things in this is we want to take the work further and look at habitat quality prediction. So not just is it chalk grassland or not, but is it good, medium or indifferent quality. And we think the tools we're working with have got pretty good capability to characterise the chalk grassland on that basis. And that would be another great step forward because it's not just where it might be, but also which are the best bits and which are the bits that might need a lot of help. So in spring and summer, we're running a new campaign with ecologists and citizen scientists, more the merrier there, to calibrate and verify the very high resolution Earth observation and artificial intelligence approach and the habitat mapping. And we would really like some help with that. Basically, we've got really good help at the moment, but more can certainly be used. So thanks for your attention. Anna will join at the Q&A, so if you've got any difficult questions, you know who we are.
Fabulous, thank you. Fantastic. So I'd like to invite Louis now from Buglife to come and talk about their aspect.
So I'll sort of get started by talking a bit about who Buglife
Yeah,
are.
talk about Buglife.
So we're the Invertebrate Conservation Trust. We were set up at the turn of the millennium after it was identified that there was no organisation looking after the vast majority of invertebrates, which is a major problem. So making up about 78% of all species on Earth, dwarfing groups like mammals, birds, that are taking up the majority of our conservation resources. We can crack on. Keep going. And so our goal is to protect invertebrates and create sustainable populations of them. And to achieve that, we've got a three-pronged approach, which is creating room for invertebrates, ensuring those and other spaces are safe for invertebrates, but also there's a lot of stigma attached to invertebrates still, as I'm sure we're all aware. So we want to build friendlier relationships between members of the public and invertebrates along the way as well. If we continue, so that's 73% of all species on this planet are invertebrates. You can't have anything functioning healthily without healthy, sustainable invertebrate populations. And we know about amazing conservation organisations like the RSPB and the Wildlife Trust, but traditionally the vast majority of our conservation resources looking at a targeted species approach has been going into that top less than 0.5% of species on this planet. And that's just really the wrong way to approach this issue. As we know, all of our invertebrate populations aren't doing well, they're under immense stress, and you can't protect anything without looking after them first. Next slide, please. And it's a range of stressors, so we're talking about the usual suspects really. Pesticide and fertiliser use in both our urban and rural spaces, climate change, artificial light pollution is becoming an increasingly prevalent issue that we're not really doing anything strategic as a country to address currently. But actually the biggest losses of biodiversity and causes of extinctions to date has been the substantial loss of habitat and the subsequent fragmentation of those habitats that result. We've lost, for our invertebrates, particularly important habitats are some of the wildflower-rich habitats we've been talking about today, such as our wildflower-rich grasslands, and we've lost 98% of them, 97 here, across the UK, and that's 3 million hectares, the size of Wales we're talking about with that one habitat. So that is an absolutely devastating loss, and that's just in the last 100 years. And we're still not talking about the decline in quality or the species-specific needs within those habitats when we're talking about that. So we've absolutely hammered these populations. Next slide, please. And if we're looking, so this is an example looking at the Dorset heaths, and you can see what that looks like on the ground. So in 1811 we had really big patches of good quality lowland heathland due to traditional management schemes, traditional grazing, taking wood for building materials off those heathland, opening them up, allowing wildflowers to thrive and reducing the nutrients, keeping that nutrient level down so that aggressive grasses or scrub species don't outcompete those flowering plants. By the 1960s we've seen huge declines in that. And its usual suspects, it's agricultural intensification, urban encroachment, planting of monocultures of crop species, particularly timber, in the form of things like Scots pine that we've got a lot of around here, and also recreational spaces like golf courses taking over some of those areas as well. And if we go to the next slide, please. And if we look at this species, this is the marsh fritillary, and it really exemplifies this issue. It likes damp, lightly grazed grasslands, and it has a specific food plant that it needs present in that. And if any of those things fall through, if it gets too hot, it gets too dry, the grazing isn't done properly, it scrubs over, that species is going to go extinct on that site. And a lot of people go to us, well, it's hopeless. What is the point of trying to protect such as picky species? But when we look at those maps, this species likely had a history of going locally extinct and recolonising throughout its history. That was probably always a natural process for the marsh fritillary. But when we've increased that fragmentation to such a scale, it's having to cross miles and miles and miles of intensive agriculture, urban towns, urban centres. And we've completely ruined that relationship of extinction and recolonisation that species like the marsh fritillary would go through. Next slide. And the result of that has been pretty devastating for UK invertebrates. We've lost 1,260 species in the last 100 years, while the picture is actually in reality probably a lot more bleak than that, unfortunately, with 250 beetles in this country have not been seen since the 1970s. Looking at Mike Waite's State of Nature report for Surrey, on the local level, 12% of our species have gone locally extinct as well. While I think about another third, another percentage to make that up to a third is also under threat. And that's in a sort of 40-year period between 2013 and the 1970s there. So devastating declines really. Next slide. And this, I don't want it to all be doom and gloom, but this is what we're doing about it. So this is our Beelines initiative. Next slide. Click through. So this is, we like to pitch this as the world's largest and most joined up habitat connectivity project. And it is. It consists of 3 kilometre wide belts mapped across the country, across all the UK's countries, across the best existing wildlife sites for invertebrates. And our plan is to use these to target habitat delivery, new habitat restoration efforts, to give the most bang for the buck when delivering habitat connectivity and rejoining those wildlife sites that those are mapped over. This has been done using computer modelling, but then also taken to local experts for roundtables to tell us what was on the ground, county by county across the country. We believe we need to fill 10% of the beelines with good patches of habitat, either as stepping stones or as belts where possible, to deliver UK-wide habitat connectivity. By adopting this approach, we can, the model suggests that we can deliver habitat connectivity on the ground with 5 times greater efficiency than using the scattergun approach of just doing it on land parcels where you find them, when you find them. That has been the method up to date. And we're also looking, when we do our work to fill these, we look to adopt permanent wildflower solutions, wildflower-rich solutions. We can't be dealing with temporary solutions that disappear and then the invertebrates disappear along with that. These need to be permanently filled with permanent solutions to deliver the best connectivity. And as of last year, this was also adopted by the European Commission. So by 2027, all EU member states are going to have to map beelines in their own countries. So this is going to be a continental approach to habitat connectivity, which isn't something that we're seeing in any other parts of the world at the moment. Next slide. And so this is what it looks like in Surrey. So you probably could have predicted a lot of this, but the North Downs is playing a huge factor in that, particularly in the east of the county. And then as we move west, it's becoming more to do with the lowland heaths. So Thames Basin heaths networks with the big military training sites showing real good connection there, and the Wilden heaths in the southwest of the county. And these are the sort of areas we've been working at. You can click through. And so, as I sort of said, we're trying to deliver wildflower-rich habitat within that. We're trying to do that through creation, enhancement or restoration is our bill for doing that, and we try and do it in over 2 hectare blocks where we can. In patches of habitat below that, you see sharp declines in the amount and diversity of invertebrates able to survive in those patches. That doesn't mean we have to provide all 2 hectares within the landscape, but we're trying to work in areas where that's possible. We also adopt an agrochemical-free approach. That's really cool for us. And we ask landowners for a 10-year management commitment for any work that we undertake. As part of the Space4Nature project, we've been managing a budget of £100,000 for last year and a bit, and we're targeting about 30 hectares of delivery within that habitat. And we've been working with a wide range of landowners to make this happen, basically, from other conservation NGOs like the Wildlife Trust, like Butterfly Conservation, local authorities, but some of you also might be part of really good community groups and see your logos up there as well. So a real range of different stakeholders to try and get this to happen on the ground, and most of these are people that we've directly delivered on their land or land that they manage. Next slide. And I'm really happy to stand here today and say we've overachieved our target already. So we're just over a year in, and we've delivered about 38 hectares directly, with about another 0.7 of a hectare influence is what we call it, where we provide advice but we can't get that 10-year management agreement in place. And we've still got 40% of the budget. So we've done really well to deliver those targets. And we've been working a range of habitats as well, from with the Unsaid Community Group who are here today, from wetlands, some of those big heathland sites we're talking about, but also the chalk grassland of the North Downs and neutral grasslands as well. And so this might be one of the sites that you're familiar with. So we've sort of done about 7 hectares of chalk grassland restoration using a variety of methods, but a lot of it being scrub clearance like this. And due to the agrochemical free approach, we're trying to look at what scrub species we're able to tackle using without chemicals. In particular, things like old man's beard, bramble that are growing over the top. So this is quarry hangers, and actually if you've been volunteering with the Space4Nature project, this is a bit that we've been monitoring with your efforts. So about a year ago, that was lying over several years worth of scrub encroachment, huge bramble banks, and over the first year we cleared the area you can see on the right there. We've now this year gone further up into that bank on the left, and if you can click through there, you can see what difference that's made. So that's full of wild basil, marjoram, wild carrot, agrimony, everything. And that's something we've been doing on lots of other chalk grassland sites as well across the county. Rosamond Garden, Rosamond Meadows, Putnam Down, just to name a few. And then also looking at our lowland heath sites. So we've delivered about 16 hectares on lowland heathland in Surrey, particularly targeting that Scots pine that we talked about. Which is a really easy scrub species to get on top of, because you cut it, it won't coppice, it won't regrow, you won't get these really horrible root balls. And so that could really easily be done without the use of agrochemicals. So we've been looking at sites like Chobham again, that will be feeding into some of the data of the surveying that's been going on, but also places like Barossa, Wisley, Ockham as well. With a lot of those sites really needing that help after going backwards substantially while management lapsed during COVID-19. Next slide. And then lastly, just wanted to talk about a big game with one of our project partners, Painshill Park, who I don't think are here today. But we've got sort of 17 hectares within their site alone just by changes in management regimes. This is natural regeneration, looking to just take the brake off with the constant mowing of grassland in spaces that are often not utilised for enough. And if you click through down, we can see that that's, we might not be looking at the rarest grassland plants here, but the abundance of flower resources that's providing with buttercups, self-heal, oxeye daisies, umbellifers, really that makes a massive difference for the connectivity in these landscapes, and just for invertebrates having that abundance of floral resources as a whole. And you can click through. But I want to talk about the challenges as well. So it hasn't been plain sailing the whole way through. We still find it really difficult to get long-term management commitments out of landowners. They're often looking at a deal that could come up, worried about lapses in funding that enables them to manage that. We don't provide management funding, we provide initial restoration creation funding. Glyphosate reliance is still a real problem in a lot of green spaces, even in conservation spaces. We don't have the manpower often to do everything in a mechanical, chemical-free way as it used to be done when these habitats were formed. We're working on a pittance to try and restore 30% of the country. and something's got to give there. Difficulty engaging landowners, who to reach, who's in charge of these spaces. Often we know where these habitats are, but we don't have any idea who's responsible for managing them. Often they don't want us to know because, they've got snooty tree huggers sending them emails, harassing them to start pulling up scrub. And access and grazing challenges, particularly in the North Downs, it's really bitty pieces of land ownership with really difficult situations to get grazing livestock in there with high pressures from dog walkers at the same time. And cost per hectare targets, this is just a thing about running a project, you have to make it work for you financially. If you want to do something in a chemical-free way, you can't just get 1 million bulldozers in to do half a hectare of habitat. So looking forwards, I think we're talking now about what's possible. We've overachieved on our habitat targets. We've still got 40% left. We want to go maybe and try and reach 60 hectares, so double the target with the funding we've got remaining. But we're also aware of a lot of sites that could be using that funding now. So we've got more sites than we have money, so we want to be looking at how to bring in more money into the project. How do we scale this up? How do we build a legacy project after this project? I'm really interested in adopting some novel chemical-free approaches over the next coming year, so we can turn to people like the Wildlife Trust, like National Trust, and say, look, we've got a case study here that works, and we don't need to be introducing glyphosate into these environments in the long term. How can we do that? Targeted beelines delivery, we have found that we're trying to find the habitats that work for us, that fit into our price schedule, but we want to be looking more at where in the beelines network is that going to be most beneficial. And bringing more landowners. We always expected to do a lot with project partners like the Wildlife Trust, like Paynes Hill, but we want to bring in more local authorities, get more people on board. We can now show them and say, look, this works. We're able to do this, and we want you to come on board and be here for a long time. Get them thinking more about things like mowing contractors, how they're managing their green spaces. Why are they wasting money on some of these contracts when it's just doing damage on taxpayer money? And Space4Nature integration, I think Richard touched on it, but we're it's a very multifaceted project, and we're keen to look at how this technology evolves. How can we be utilising this in beelines? I'm not the only beelines officer in the country. This could be a tool that really influences and revolutionises the way we're able to do our work. Cool. I think that's all. Thank you.
And really pleasing to see the targets being met for the on-the-ground delivery in the Space4Nature project. That was really important for us that we had that. So we've now got Ben, by the power of television, remotely.
Hi, my name's Ben Siggery, and I'm the GIS Research and Monitoring Manager at Surrey Wildlife Trust. My day job involves getting evidence behind our conservation actions and increasing our interactions with universities. I'm also the PhD student associated with the Space4Nature project, and over the next couple of minutes I'm going to tell you a little bit about what my PhD is about and what we're trying to achieve. Space4Nature is all about using new technologies and improving the way we monitor our habitats. But what the satellites and the AI can't do is tell us what our restoration targets should be. So the role for my PhD research is to think about how we might set our restoration targets based in scientific evidence, and also thinking about what our ecosystems in Surrey used to be like in the past and what we can learn from that. The field of science my research is in is called paleoecology, which is the study of past environments. So it's looking at how ecosystems have changed over time, how those have been influenced by different events, including man's influence. So the way it works is that you'll look at things left behind in the sediments. So that might be biological indicators, it might be non-biological indicators, but commonly it's things like pollen remains, pieces of old charcoal, pieces of old seeds. It also might be things called diatoms, which are a type of microscopic algae. And using all of those things, you can reconstruct the way the environment used to look and what was going on at different points in time. That science is now being more and more applied to conservation. So we're looking at how we could restore to those older baselines what species might have been lost through an environment, or how it might have been influenced by different things. Although it's not particularly well known in conservation, paleoecology has already helped us have some big wins in the environmental sector. The best known of which is when in the 1970s and the 1980s, it played a pivotal role in the acid rain debate. Paleoecology used diatoms to reconstruct the acidity of lots of different lochs in Scotland and also in Scandinavia as well, and they were able to prove that these lochs weren't acidic prior to the increase in fossil fuel usage. So we were able to link the increase in nitrogen emissions to the increase in acidity in these lakes, and that was eventually used to inform legislation that improved the way fossil fuels are emitted and the pollution from them is managed. So what have we done so far as part of this research? Earlier in the year, we went to Chobham Common to take some sediment cores. As you know, Chobham Common is one of the Space4Nature test sites, so I wanted to include it in the research as well. We went out to find some ponds that had been there relatively undisturbed for long periods of time so that they would be suitable places to take a sediment core. Using some old maps and as well as information that we had, I was able to locate a couple that had been undisturbed since the 1800s. So with a team of researchers from UCL who came down and lent us all their equipment, we went out and we took a sediment core at Glover's Pond and one at the Bee Garden Pond. So what that involves is going out into a boat into the water body and taking a big cylindrical tube and pushing that down into the sediment at the bottom of the water. You push it down as far as you can go, and then you put a bung in to create a pressure seal. Then when you lift it up, all the mud doesn't fall out the bottom, and you have a kind of record going down with the newest mud at the top, the oldest mud at the bottom, and then you will slice it up into 1 centimetre segments, bag each of those segments up, and then they go back to the lab. So in our lab work on the Chobham Common core, we're going to be looking at 4 different things. The first thing we're going to look at is those diatoms that I mentioned earlier. So we'll identify what different species of diatoms there are found in the sediment at Chobham Common and look at how the assemblage of them changes over time. Diatoms are really sensitive to changes in environmental conditions, so they make really good indicators to give us a detailed picture of how things like water temperatures changed, acidities changed, salinities changed. So we'll wait and see what results we get from those. We're also going to be looking at macrofossils, which are the remains of bits of seeds, bits of leaves, other kind of small invertebrate remains, and those can tell us a more detailed picture about the local vegetation in a site. So we'll be able to see, has it changed between being perhaps more ephemeral, perhaps more wooded around the area, if there was more grass rather than trees, so we'll be able to see some trends from those as well. And the last 2 things we're going to be looking at are something called SCPs and macrocharcoal. So the SCPs, or spheroidal carbonaceous particles, which is a bit of a mouthful, are a type of ash that is only produced through fossil fuel burning. So you can use them to give you a rough dating of your core, because you can look back through the core and see where they might have peaked in the 1950s and then when they really drop off prior to that. And then when you find them completely absent, you know you've reached the Industrial Revolution, because they wouldn't have existed naturally at all. They only exist from fossil fuel combustion. Lastly, the macrocharcoal is what we're going to use to give us a bit of an insight into the fire history at Chobham Common. Because as you'd imagine, when there are wildfires, it leaves behind charcoal remains in the sediment. So we can basically count the pieces of charcoal we find and be able to identify when there were really big fires, where there were no fires, and see how that changes over time and how that might correlate with some of the other indicators that we're looking at as well. The preliminary results we've had so far have given us a little bit to go on so far with Chobham Common, especially at Bee Garden Pond. So we found that the SCPs disappeared about 30 centimetres down, and there's 10 centimetres under that. So we know that the core goes back at least to the Industrial Revolution, and definitely a little bit before that as well. We've also got some results from the macrocharcoal that have, unsurprisingly, very high levels of macrocharcoal over the last 50 years, and then it really drops off. It's quite interesting, because then when you get back to the Industrial Revolution, it starts to increase again. So it may be linked to the military presence between the 1850s and the 1950s at Chobham. Once we get our results from the diatoms and the macrofossils, it will start to paint a more fuller picture of what's going on. I'm really pleased to say that the first piece of work from my PhD has now been published. This wasn't related to the sediment core at Chobham Common, but it was related to a survey that some of you may have completed for me. So I had a survey go out to ask conservation practitioners what they think about paleoecology, whether they'd like to use it, what they think the barriers to that might be, and what they think some of the solutions would be. We had about 150 people reply and give us some really useful insights into what they thought. We found that in general, people were really keen, although they did have a mixed understanding of what it meant. They wanted to know how they could use it more, to, especially to look at things like their past site condition or past species assemblages. But unsurprisingly, they did come up with that things like money, time, expertise were big barriers for them, but also poor communication from the academic community. So the solutions that kind of came out of that were having more case studies with more applied work to inform people what is in the realm of the possible. They wanted an online database that might be related to having some GIS as well to give them more access to the data. And they also wanted to see it used in conjunction with things like biodiversity net gain and other policy drivers that really dictate what conservation practitioners do on a day-to-day basis. So the next steps for that will be developing some case studies based on the recommendations and saying, okay, can we make it work in this way? And that's what I'll be going to work on over the next year or so. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the work I've been up to this year as part of the Space4Nature project. I'm really looking forward to giving you another update at the next one of these events. But if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with the meantime. I'll see you guys soon.
It's just, for me, the fact that we were able to get the PhD as part of the Space4Nature project was really, really important, because our working relationship with the university is really critical to help us develop the evidence-based approach that we need, but to root it in practicality and in the application on the ground. So, and the more we work together, the more we're able to bring that academic rigour into, I'm not really supposed to be talking now, but I'll stop in a minute. The more we're able to bring that academic rigour into what we need to do to deliver outcomes on the ground. The reason why that feels really important to me at the moment is because we could take the view that traditional conservation approaches have not achieved what we need them to achieve at the scale that they need to have happened. So if you look at the fact that we're still receiving state of nature reports that show nature is declining, we've lost over 70% of species, and we're still getting those messages. Now there's an argument that all of our good work might be making that happen less quickly, but nonetheless we haven't turned the dial to the positive side of, yes, we are actually recovering nature. So for me, that means we should all be challenging ourselves about the way that we deliver nature recovery. And part of that is bringing the evidence-based and the high-level academic thinking into our arena of nature conservation so that we can actually deliver nature recovery, because we've got to turn that dial and we've got to do it really urgently. So that's really why I was pleased to see Ben's work. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'll climb off my soapbox. Now I'd like to introduce another Ben, please, from the Land App, who's going to give us our last talk before the panel questions. Thanks, Ben.
Great. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I'm a techie. I'm a data engineer at Land App, although I did study ecology a few years ago, so there's a bit of relevance there. But yeah, so Land App, if you haven't heard of it, is a sort of easy-to-use mapping software which a whole host of various people related to land use decisions use to have a sort of window into the GIS world, but they don't want to pick up a sort of heavy mapping software program. So yeah, you can go to the next slide. So it's been around for the last 5 years, and yeah, we're now at a good stage where we've got a lot of the UK mapped on the software. So we've got 7.5 million hectares on the software. We've got 21,000 users. We've got 4.5 of those sort of active every month, and then we've got these key customers, including a growing user base of wildlife trusts and ecologists, and then we've got authoritative data partnerships like Ordnance Survey, UK HAB, which I'll go into, and the Land Registry. And finally, we're sort of an official tool for a couple of those government schemes mentioned, like biodiversity net gain and the England Woodland Creation Offer from the Forestry Commission. Next slide. So yeah, so the framework that we're trying to help speed up starts with getting every one of our users a baseline as quickly as possible. And obviously this links in with Space4Nature. You can probably see where we're hoping to collaborate later. But yeah, so at the moment we try to get these users a baseline so they can therefore work out obviously the next steps in a land management plan. They can then go ahead and collaborate with the people who are useful for them on their farm, and also perhaps with different organisations like Wildlife Trust, and then finally working out where they can get funded to be able to deliver those interventions. So I'll go into a bit of detail into the first bit. So at the moment we've got this tool called a best guess baseline, and photos not particularly revealing because it's a bit homogeneous here at Tim, my colleague's family farm. But yeah, essentially it's a sort of one-click tool to get in the language of UK HAB, which is the official code for different schemes like biodiversity net gain. You can see on your holding where the various habitats make up the area, and that is at the moment unfortunately pinned onto quite a few premium data sets, which means that we do have to charge for this. But as you can probably tell, we're hoping that with Space4Nature we can get a tool which will speed that up to make it even more accessible. And then finally, you can bring in some collaborators to improve that baseline and make sure you're happy with the ecologists that you've got the ground truth data correct. Next slide, please. Yeah, and now you can go ahead and you can bring in all of the various data layers which might be relevant for getting an idea of what you can do with your land to get funded for these different schemes on at the moment. And so, crucially, you can bring in B-lines, which interacts with what I said earlier, and yeah, we can go ahead and see all the various protected habitats and priority areas for different interventions. There's now, as I mentioned, a couple of weeks ago we released this sort of UCO tool, which is the tool of the Forestry Commission, to be able to show on a farm where exactly you can get paid for doing woodland creation in the exact places where the Forestry Commission would like you to do that, based off of proximity to existing woodland, proximity to flood resilience, priority areas, and a whole host of other criteria, and you can easily just see in a few seconds where exactly you can get paid for those interventions. So next slide. So yeah, and then you can go ahead and use the sort of easy to use land app mapping tools to be able to whip up a land management plan. You can co-design that with whoever you'd like, and then you can get a breakdown of what exactly it is that you're hoping to use in a sort of plan, which can then go ahead and be sort of converted into the official format to apply for various schemes. So yeah, next slide. And just to add to that, we've got a mobile app which allows people in the field to do some in-field measurements and get some photographic evidence of interventions, for example, with the Sustainable Farming Incentive. That's a mandatory thing that you need to do. We can bring in GPS and all those data layers on top as you're out in the field. And yeah, that's definitely a part of, with the whole SFI, more SFI schemes coming in, that we'd really like to improve the sort of survey abilities of the app. Next up. Yeah, and then you can go ahead and you can invite all of the various users of the land app in your vicinity to create a kind of farmer-led cluster. You can go ahead and see a bigger picture and a map of maps, which I'll show you in a second, and then you can go ahead and see how this interacts with local and national schemes. So if you go to the next slide, there's this map of maps feature which will be able to show you a zoomed out view of various users of land app in your area which have published their plans, and then you can go ahead and interconnect your different ideas and then see how you could get a more cohesive, connected land management plan out of it. So next slide. Yeah, and then finally you can go ahead and sort of aggregate all that data to be able to see exactly how many biodiversity net gain units you can get. You can see your connectivity scores. You can see how you fare in the sort of basic payment scheme at the moment, although that's phasing out. And obviously, yeah, countryside stewardship as well is a big use case for this, this sort of insights dashboard. So next slide, please. Yeah, and then finally you can go ahead and export those and send them to the right people. Next up. yeah, and then those are sort of a selection of the various people that we've worked with, and yeah, growing number of wildlife trusts within that. And then, yeah, with our founder Tim being based in Surrey, we've done a lot of work with Surrey Wildlife Trust, sort of, yeah, and hoping for that to really consolidate with Space4Nature. So in the next slide, oh yeah, and just to say that for the majority of what I mentioned, that's all for free, when we don't want to leave anyone behind in terms of getting access to these tools and integrating with the official, the official schemes with Land App. And so yeah, so where we sort of see at the moment, obviously we're going to hopefully be able to be of use when it comes to delivery phase, and we've now introduced this screenshot on the right, which is a bit of a sort of proof of concept of how we can add in an ability for a land user to say if they're seeking funding or if they have a verified status. So that links into, for this baseline data that we're hoping to get delivered through the Land App, we can get a continuous feedback loop to say when certain areas are predicted and for a certain habitat, correct that and get that fed back into the machine learning model to be able to deliver a better habitat map over time. You've got that map of maps feature, which will be hopefully of use when it comes to joining up various interventions, and obviously connectivity is a huge part of the sort of landscape plan being of use. And at the moment still just hoping to be useful when we can get those results through to all of our users of the app at the moment. But yeah, I think that's everything. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. So, any questions for anybody at the moment? Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Peter Hewitt from a student at Harrington-Edmans, studying wildlife conservation. I know I've got to say I'm really enthused by the whole programme, it's fantastic. I'm also a volunteer for Space4Nature in terms of data gathering. And so my questions kind of in three parts. One, when do you think the practical application is going to be to actually start doing something with the data that comes out in terms of joining land? And then how are you just engaging with publicly owned land or NGO owned land, or are you kind of reaching out to the private sector? And then finally, are you tying this in with biodiversity net gain and all the change in legislation to encourage that private ownership to come into this programme?
Fabulous, thank you. So just to make sure everybody heard the question, so three questions really. One is timeline in terms of when this is going to be practically available for use. Second is around private sector, whether or not private sector land is coming into this. And the third was... how are you engaging with biodiversity net gain? Engaging with biodiversity net gain, thank you. So on timeline, is that a Richard answer? I'll see that.
Sure. Just going to trip you up, Sarah.
Yeah, that's right. I was ready for it.
I would say, my view is I think we will have sufficient work done on the high resolution Earth observation that we could be starting to use it midsummer next year. Not everywhere, but in selected cases to help design and co-design interventions.
And do you think that's
Yes.
about right?
But let's answer the question in terms of the tool after we, so I believe, thank you. So the tool and the results of this predicting chalk grassland and all other different type of habitats will, as many of us have been mentioned already in the presentations, will help to make the connectivity between habitats, to look into the quality of the habitat as well, not only predicting, but also to look into the quality of as well, and to connect this different type of habitats. Hopefully we'll be used for Buglife as well. We work closely with Land App as well to integrate the results into Land App. That's the first part of the question.
Yes. Yes.
The second was about I forgot.
Well, I was going to say, so the next
Yeah,
question was
yeah.
about private sector land.
Private,
So
yes, yeah.
if you've got comments on that, otherwise
Probably,
we
no,
yes,
it's
pass on
probably
to
them. The fourth one, the fourth question
was about biodiversity net gain.
biodiversity, yeah. So as you probably know, BNG metric is very subjective at the moment. We are trying to make this more transparent through the tool we are trying to create here, in a way that will hopefully be less subjective. So we have plans to look into different indicators of chalk grassland, of heathland as well, in order to apply algorithm to give us a score from like good habitat, different scores, but in some ways to bring more transparency into the system. Yeah,
which is great. So Louis, do you want to pick up on the private sector and then we can pass it along?
Yeah, so I guess that really is the ambition. It is still a really tough nut to crack in terms of private land ownership. When working with NGOs or local authorities, there's already an acceptance that they're often not going to make a profit off that land, and so we're not competing with that as much. We have worked with private landowners, but often that's been facilitated by a community group that's been working there before. So in the case of Unstead, community group having a pre-existing relationship with Thames Water, that's helped us to work on their land. It's harder in our pitch when we have to go and say, here's a 10-year management commitment, can you sign it before we do anything, than if they've already had a dedicated group that's been building that relationship over a long time. But we will work with them, and we're trying to, but it is definitely a tougher nut to crack than sites that already have a history of being dedicated to nature conservation, but are not meeting those targets for some reason. It's also a really interesting conversation that you raised about the BNG and how does that work? Does that provide an incentive for some of this? And we hope it will. We know that this could provide a major financial incentive to get more private landowners on board. And we would like to see that B-lines adopted in some of those planning decisions in where that BNG is done. And it's a conversation that we're starting to have internally, but it's a very new, raw space that changes how we pitch things. And we haven't completely got our head around it, but we know that that's a space we're going to be working in that has a lot of potential. It's difficult when, governmental changes to some of these schemes and uncertainty is making it difficult for the private sector to engage, and also difficult for us to get our head around it as well.
Could I just add a quick clarification on about the private land or public land? The classification we're doing is completely agnostic about who the landowner is. So what you're saying is all the land.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point that as much as if to do with the Nature Recovery Network, it has to include private land, and the ultimate aim here is that we have a tool that doesn't discriminate in terms of the knowledge it gives us about where to best build in the connectivity. Obviously there's all sorts of challenges about implementation, but we need that sort of oversight from the outset. In terms of the next sort of couple of years of the project, the degree to which we use private land as test sites, it's kind of logistical things kick in there. We really need sites where citizen scientists can freely access them. But we're using sites where we've already got quite a lot of good ecological knowledge, because we're kind of trying to layer up the data so that the citizen science data complements other data sets we've got, which would sort of preclude, I guess, a lot of privately owned land from just the developing the tool side of things. But in terms of the output, we absolutely need this to be holistic. Yeah.
Fabulous. Ben, I don't know if you would. Do you have information around public versus private land ownership in terms of what's on the land up already?
Yeah, a lot of our data layers are linked to private versus public owned land, and so that's something that be able to lay on top and visualise when the results come out. And then in terms of encouraging them to the private land owners, it will be a case of just really showing them the low-hanging fruit, the sort of no-brainer land to be able to get funded a high amount for putting interventions in the right place spatially.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh, great, everybody's warmed up now. I've got two at the back and one at the front. So if I could go with the gentleman at the back first, then I'll move across and then come down. Yes, please.
In addition to the Earth observation data you're using, will you or are you going to be integrating digital terrain models, LiDAR, geological and soil data sets?
Yes, that's a good question. In one of the type of the machine learning we are using, we're using different variables, we call them. So these variables are different data sets, basically. So exactly what you said, we are using topographic parameters extracted from LiDAR, because there is this data set provided by DEFRA. But also we are using the soil type. We're using different soil type vegetation indices, the health of the vegetation we are taking into account as well. So all these variables are feeding into the machine learning. But citizen science data plays a critical role, just because the computer basically is learning from those places where is collected the data, and is learning from these examples and trying to predict other areas with similar features, like in query hangars, for instance, like the data we have collected. And yes, we are using this data. Yeah.
Fabulous, thank you. Then I had another question at the back, if I may. Yes, please.
The National Trust has quite a lot of them in North Downs. They weren't on any of them. Does that mean they're not part of the series?
I don't know, do you want to say anything
Is
about
that
that?
in the habitat delivery or the technology?
So some of them, there's definitely some back short grassland.
Yeah, so we've been having quite a lot of conversations with them. We haven't been able to get stuff across the line with them currently. We're still working with them, particularly down in the Wilden Heaths. I don't know, I found it a difficult one to engage at times, but we're definitely keen to work with them because they're a major landowner in that space. So we're just working with it, but it's quite, as an organisation, quite a big beast, and it can be difficult to know where to engage at all times. And it looks very different across the county in terms of who is responsible for different pieces of land across the county as well.
Okay, thank you. And then Julie, a question.
Yes, we've already been talking about the project I've got in mind. So I'm a local resident, but I also work for a local company called Siggery, very involved in the space sector. And we've got some similar machine learning with Earth observation projects, monitoring seagrass, for example, finding where that is, which we've been successful with, and also down in Devon we look after the biosphere, which is all about working out where sewage is going into the river systems. So I'm really interested in working together. One of the questions I want really to ask is, are you also mapping the priority habitats that you're not allowed? So where, like fens, for example, and peat, you're not allowed, there's no biodiversity net gain because they can't be recreated. So
yeah, so I don't know if Richard or Anna want to pick up a question about opportunities to look at other areas. I might just make a comment about biodiversity net gain, if I may. Biodiversity net gain is going to be a very important tool for us, but it's really, really important to remember it is only going to be about this much of this much that we need for nature recovery. So biodiversity net gain is not the answer to all our problems. It is a tool in our toolbox to help us deliver some nature recovery. And in Surrey we do have a 20% minimum position statement, which means that we require double the statutory 10% that the DEFRA metric actually requires. The difference between the 10% and the 20% is absolutely critical if we want to push off-site nature recovery as part of biodiversity net gain, but we also know through some of the research that we've done already that that biodiversity net gain element of investment in nature recovery is very small in comparison to the overall need for investment. So the only reason I say that is because I think it's really important that we don't all get focused on biodiversity net gain, and there's lots of other things that we need to do in terms of investment. So I don't know if you have comments in terms of that particular question.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question, and it's very good to have sort of got connected, and I'm sure we'll be following up jointly together, and great local as well. In terms of those other habitats you mentioned, I don't see any reason why this approach and the technology couldn't be just as useful for monitoring those and sort of seeing how they may change over time. We don't have a specific plan to include it within Space4Nature, but equally it's not specifically excluded.
It would be really helpful. You mentioned you found more grassland. It'd be really great to say, by the way, these are the habitats at the moment you're not allowed to touch legally, and they're not all recognised. I know they're not.
That's
Yes, I mean obviously Space4Nature is being created as a tool to help inform interventions and monitor them. It's not necessarily it's responding to the policy environment that currently exists. Obviously there's a lot of other work that we do to encourage that policy environment to be as robust as possible in terms of priority habitats. For example, one of the important aspects of the Space4Nature project is the legacy piece. So you know, we're already talking, we've got 2 years left of the project, we're already talking about the legacy aspect, because again, you will be familiar with this, the funding only takes you so far. The next stage is how do we create a sustainably funded legacy that allows us to do more of those sorts of things that you're talking about. So I've got one at the front and then I'll come to the back, so yes please.
Hi, my name's Rob. I work with Surrey Biodiversity Information Centre. I've just got a quick question for Richard and Anna as well about the resolution of the satellite imagery. It's very high resolution satellite imagery, down to about 30 centimetres right now per pixel. My question to you, and legacy is really good kind of direction for it, is satellite imagery is getting better and better all the time, and there's going to be a massive boom to access to space, and so the information that we're going to be getting is going to be getting much higher resolution than 30 centimetres soon. How does that fit into the model that you're developing? Is that going to make your life easier? Are you going to be able to map habitat easier? Or are you going to have to reapproach the model and say, well, actually, now that we have higher resolution imagery, these habitats aren't quite as big as we thought they would be. We're going to have to scale down what we thought. How are you guys going to approach that?
That's a great question, and I completely agree with you. I'm sure the resolution will improve over time. So what we're looking to build in this is not a sort of fixed point model to a certain technology, but to build something that can evolve as the access and the free access actually to the imagery grows. I think it will require reappraisal. I mean, I do a lot of work in other areas as well, and frankly, you know, you have to update stuff on a sort of 3 to 5 year cycle, in my opinion, to maintain currency of any kind of modelling system. So I think the most important thing is actually to get started and do what we're doing now, but exactly as Sarah Jane was saying, the legacy thing, that is going to be built into the approach. This approach is not a single shot, it's going to be something that is going to continue for many, many years to come. Anna, do you want to add?
Yeah, that's a good question, but higher resolution, it doesn't necessarily bring more accuracy, not all the time. The better accuracy we obtain only when we have more data on the ground, because the machine learning will learn from more examples on the ground, and there will be better results at the end. 0.3, 0.5 meter resolution is very expensive. So if we want to do it at a county scale, that would be quite expensive. However, the data we have used so far, the 3 meter resolution is free of charge for academic purpose. and it's provided by Planet Lab. It's one of the highest company in America and so on, but they provide this data for free for academic. 0.3, 0.5, it comes to a price. Yeah.
Fabulous, thank you. Yes, I've got two questions at the back, so I'm going to go to the gentleman with the striped shirt, then right at the back, and then I'll come to you, Simon. So,
hello, Robert Bristow. It was a quick question on practicalities. We did our survey rather late in the season, and it was often quite hard to find the survey because they were now online. And is there anything that can be done to improve? I expect it was very well marked at the beginning, but is there anything that can be improved?
I don't know if you or Andy.
Well, I think we're looking at, from the survey techniques when we're moving forward, is potentially putting more areas, putting more stakes in the ground, for example. So, I mean, we didn't want to do that this year because obviously you're disturbing the habitat as well. But I think through the feedback and stuff we've got, we're going to have to look at that over the winter. So we will look at trying to make it easier for you to find those areas moving forward.
Fabulous, thank you. I've got a question right at the back.
It was a follow-up from the moment about remote sensing and the spatial resolution of the pixels. That we can, responding to this question, we can also train using artificial intelligence to go from larger pixels from the past to smaller pixels. But there is even more interesting information we want than the size of the pixel. Is the number of bands, the spectral bands we get. And hyperspectral, many bands are more informative than a small pixel with fewer bands. And at the moment, there is a hyperspectral German satellite providing hyperspectral image. We have some images allowed here for an area in Surrey. And if we recover for every different land cover the spectral resolution with a fifth spectral radiometer, then we can say the proportion of these different land covers in our pixel. It's called a mixing, and I think we already have tools for a lot of detail on this.
Thank you. Did you want to say anything about that?
Of course. Thank you so much, Belen. Yes. That's a very technical side of this project, but thank you so much for bringing this into the discussion. So hyperspectral satellite data is a different type of satellites we haven't touched, and the reason that we haven't, this satellite from a German company comes at a 30-meter resolution. So we are trying to look into the details and more detail, a 3-meter resolution or less than 3 meter. I'm not saying it's not useful, it's actually very useful, especially if we want to look into the quality of the habitat, because those spectral bands will give us very important information about the quality. However, it will come at the 30-meter resolution. That's my answer. Yeah.
Thank you. Simon.
Simon Humphreys, don't know how to describe myself really.
Chalk Grassland extraordinaire.
Ecological polymath. Question about habitat quality, and particularly how to assess it and how to predict it. If we were to ask 10 ecologists what they mean by habitat quality, you'd get at least 20 answers. So, for example, a botanist's view of a very high quality chalk grassland might be actually relatively poor in invertebrate quality. So how is habitat quality going to be assessed and predicted, sort of taking that into account?
We thought we'd just talk to one ecologist.
Get one answer.
I think it's a really good question, and frankly, I don't really know, to be honest. I think we'll have to have a lot of conversations and somehow do some sort of consensus arrival. It is why I said only 3 levels, for example. I started out my career as a plant and fungal biologist and everything, so I've gone full circle really now. I've finally got back to ecology, which fortunately hasn't changed that much actually in some ways. I don't know. It would be very good to discuss with you and pretty widely, which I'm sure we're going to be doing over the next 6 to 12 months of that, and we'll focus it probably into chalk grassland to begin with. will be wanting to ideally ask similar questions to the other types of habitat.
Yes, that's a very good question indeed. Before I answer the question, I would like to thank you for all of your hard work throughout your years. You know, that data is very valuable in the machine learning side. Answering your question, so we are working currently on the approach, basically on the methodology. So far, I'm working on the the algorithm where I'm thinking about, but this should be discussed, with all, experts like you, Mike, and Surrey Wildlife Trust. I'm thinking to use NDVI, different vegetation indices, but also factors from the soil type, also information from the light pollution as well, because as has been mentioned here, it has affected habitat and different species. So all this information into an algorithm to predict the quality. It's not going to be perfect because nothing is perfect, but we are trying to make it better than the existing quality assessment.
Do you think you'll be able to give an indication of the level of confidence levels?
Yes. Yes.
Because that's obviously very important in terms of people then interpreting the data.
Yes, but something that I missed to explain here is exactly the data the citizen scientists are collecting on the ground. They are not only collecting, okay, this is a species specific for the chalk grassland, it's collecting the height of the plant, more other information, a very high level information on the ground, and that information will feed into machine learning and will teach the computer, train the computer to identify not only other type of chalk grassland on other area, but also quality of that type of habitat. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else want to make any comments about quality?
So a thing about quality with invertebrate communities as well. So I think we have to restrict what the purpose of this tool is as well. It comes up a lot of what's this going to be, how are you going to know what the invertebrate community in that habitat is? A good chalk grassland in one place might not have might have very different invertebrate communities. If it's been through a history of being cut, not grazed, overgrazed, if it's a more isolated habitat patch. I don't think this is the be-all and end-all for replacing invertebrate surveys. I think it's going to give us a broad-scale picture, but hopefully a complete picture of what the habitats and the fragmentation will look like at a landscape scale. I don't think it completely replaces expert invertebrate surveys or completely in-depth vegetation surveys either. And we're never going to be able to look at stuff like neonicotinoid presence in nature reserves. It's just not possible with this tool. So it's not removing everything, but it's not going to tell us everything can be a silver bullet, but it's going to be a very powerful tool in our locker box that we don't have currently.
Fabulous, thank you. Any more questions? I've got two. This side's open up now. I'll take the lady in green at the front and then I'll come to you afterwards.
This is not meant to be a glib comment or question. Can we get the king involved?
Yeah.
I'm quite serious about that. He is a very wealthy landowner. He has a lot of influence across other landowners, and he is incredibly passionate about the environment. Can we get all of this in front of him and his mates? But also thinking of other moderately wealthy landowners, like I know Mr. Banks over there, let it slip that.
But he's very wealthy.
Our lovely local tennis star, Mr. Murray, is his property is on a beeline.
Yeah, he's one of our neighbours actually.
Yeah. So is there, the king might be a bit of a reach, but is there something that we can do to bring together these more the landowners who are a bit wealthy than wealthier than possibly the rest of us put together?
Yeah.
Is there something there?
So I think that's a really good point. I'll come over to Anna in a minute. I think two things I would say. One of the things that we are starting to see a bit of a trend towards is that the larger landowners are easier to engage with than smaller, let's say more farmer landowners. And that's partly, I think, because larger estates have more land to play with. So it's less of an issue for them to say, do you know what, that 10% over there, I'm quite happy to try something different, because their sort of space to play with is a bit bigger. So we have got a little bit of a trend where we're starting to see larger landowners in Surrey want to have conversations with us, which is very encouraging. As Wildlife Trust, we do have connections with King Charles. He's been very supportive of a lot of the work that Wildlife Trust and so on do. And then I think we were going to just make a comment about COP as well, weren't we? Yeah.
So as we are speaking now, King Charles is in Dubai. COP28 is the largest and biggest, conference in climate change. Fortunately, and we are very proud that Space4Nature will be featured among 32 projects, very, carefully selected in the UK, where address climate change, biodiversity, and all these 32 projects, including Space4Nature, will be featured on an app where different policymakers, different people all around the globe will come and learn about the projects in the UK, and including King Charles will come to the stand, and I hope, and I talk to people from Space4Climate to introduce and to talk about Space4Nature, because we know that King Charles is really fond of biodiversity.
Fabulous, thank you.
Can I just...
Yeah, please.
Just to add to that, in terms of the reach of the project and the legacy of the project, we're in the process of, we're one of the pilot projects of a platform called Space4Nature, which has been set up by DEFRA to put conservation projects out there, mainly to corporates, but not entirely corporates. It's to hook in also sort of high net worth individuals, if you like. It's essentially like crowdfunding. It's run by Crowdfunder, but it's sort of Crowdfunder Plus, in as much as it's geared towards corporates and sort of big donations. So we've got through to be one of the pilot projects where we can put Space4Nature out there in terms of how we extend what we're doing at the moment through the PPL funded programme to look at other habitats and expand the reach of the project.
Fabulous, thank you. So I'll come to you next, Tony, if I may. There's another gentleman there first.
Another slightly technical question, but you talked a lot about the impressive spatial resolution of the imagery you have, and also a little bit about the spectral resolution. How about temporal? What's the kind of revisit time? Can you use it for change detection if habitats get changed or lost? And I can imagine that might be important looking at quality of habitats as well, looking at it across the season.
Temporal resolution, it's all about the revisit time. Satellites are spinning around the world and taking pictures, different satellites have different revisit times. The one we are using is 1 day revisit time. However, we don't need that temporal resolution for this, because we have been collecting data for chalk grassland between May and June 2023. So when I collected the data, when I extracted the data from the platform, satellite data, I queried the system to give me all the data cloud-free, because cloud is quite a problem. But luckily we had good weather, so no clouds between this period of time, and I extracted and mosaic, put all together, all the tiles together in a shape of Surrey County. However, now at the moment we are trying to predict chalk grassland with the data we have been collecting in 2023 using other satellite imageries from the past years. Because we have some of the data from Simon, as I said, we can't go back to 90. Yes, we can, but we can use Landsat data, which is coming at a 60-meter resolution, so it's not really feasible. But we are going back to 2018, 2019 until 2023. So we are trying to use the data we collected to predict the chalk grassland, to see if it's similar sites predicted. So that is something on the pipeline to do it very soon. The temporal resolution for this project is exactly, we have a good temporal resolution from the satellites which satisfy the project.
Yeah, but this is more of a snapshot than the current situation rather than try going forward to detect changes, to see whether things are improving or worsening.
It's continuously, exactly, it's continuously coming in, yeah.
Okay, it's daily.
So it would allow you to do the monitoring piece, which in effect is what you're asking.
I guess I think with the integration of the land back. So the monitoring of impact is a critical outcome element potentially, and one of the reasons for working with an organisation like the Land Act. Yeah, great, thanks.
Tony.
Thank you, Tony Williams. Just a comment really on this conundrum of private land ownership and access to it, particularly describing yourself. I just wonder if there's maybe a wee bit of a model here where, you know, one end of the continuum you've got doing the right thing. In other words, you know, taking a philanthropic approach to, I realise the national issue you've got here, and I can play a part in that. So that's a big good end. And then the other end, it's, you know, what's in it for me financially, and what do I get out of this, and what's the scheme that delivers me the money. And I suppose another piece to it is, what's the intervention by you guys in terms of access to my land, and how disturbing is it going to be, and you know, what part do I have to play, and so on. I just wonder if there's something in that in terms of how one approaches. Forgive me, maybe already thinking this way, but you know, almost trying to identify which buttons are going to work for which individual. Because, you know, very few people I suspect would say, I don't want to be part of this, I don't want to be part of it, and decent and good and long term. I don't think anybody would actually, or few people would probably say that, but there may be a fear about what happens when you come onto my land, or as you say, I don't actually want my land disclosed too much, although frankly, with the Space4Nature thing, we're going to be able to hide from that very well.
Yes.
So, you know, there's many variables, I'm sure, to this, but I just wondered if there's something about the philanthropic approach at one end and the hard cash at the other, and is there something that you model for?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what's going on. You know, those are the conversations we're having. Is, you know, it's all very good, we should do this, but you know, what's in it for me? And I think, you know, even that's a bit of a cynical way that they often phrase it to you. I think the reality is that if you do the intervention and there's no long-term management funding and they're losing money on land that they're having to pay to lease, it just doesn't financially work for them. And that's the reality, and I don't think sometimes project timelines fit very well to support landowners to access those other forms of funding, or we ourselves are stretched for capacity. And the reality of that has been those have been harder people to reach. It is something where we're having conversations about, could we be upscaling the quality of seed mixes that are going into you know, lay-aside and agricultural spaces? Is it something we could be talking about? I mean, B&G's been a thing here. Is it something we could be layering on top of that we're providing the initial startup costs to allow landowners to access a financial mechanism to do the right thing, but do it also because it's going to provide for their livelihood? They are conversations we're having, but they're the harder conversations and the often longer time scale conversations that go beyond project time lengths. And you know, we've approached through the beeline stuff well over 100 landowners probably in the last year, and it gets to the point when another winter clearance season is coming up, and all of these landowners that you're working with, their projects are becoming bigger and bigger and more complex, and they're less engaged with you to sort that out, that you start going, okay, where can we make wins for nature? And often that looks like going back to nature reserves. Now that's something that we're trying to get through and push through that barrier, as has been highlighted in the next year of the project. And equally, we've delivered on our targets, so maybe we have more financial push to go and do more expensive jobs that get those landowners involved. But it is a really big challenge, and that is why it's still a challenge, and it's not something we've solved in nature conservation.
I think I would just add though, you know, 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking to 100 landowners. So we are going in the right direction. You could argue that we need to go faster, but we're definitely in a better place now. I think, would you agree, Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to add about the fact that we now have a nature-based solutions team within the Wildlife Trust. It's quite a recent kind of addition to what we do, but it's so important because we need to reach the bulk of the landowners across the county. And I think some early kind of learning that those guys have found is that the thing to do is to work with the landowner and kind of look at what the options are for funding and sort of keeping an eye on what these funding opportunities are coming over the horizon, rather than sort of to push them in a certain direction. It's more kind of working with what's going to work for them, and there's sort of an increasing kind of palette of options that seem to be emerging. So that seems to be, I think, the approach we're taking.
I mean, I think, I also take comfort from the fact that, as Ben said earlier, they've got 7.5 million hectares of land across the country mapped on the Land Act, 21,000 users. 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. That increase has been exponential, and that's because people are motivated to at least start having these conversations, even if they're not always easy. So I do think we are moving in the right direction, but we've got to think about how do we scale and accelerate what we're doing.
There's a lot of landowners doing stuff privately on their own patches anyway, and it's also again about how Space4Nature and stuff can fill in those blanks of knowing what's going on. Are these subsidy schemes that a lot of landowners are engaging in privately, are they working? Are they reaching those desired habitats? Is the knowledge there? So that's another issue. I don't think it is a complete selfish approach of what's in it for me. A lot of people are doing stuff out there, and it's about why isn't that working? How can we join that up better?
I think you did put your finger on something that obviously with the satellites we do have the ability to look over the fence and things like that, and that is what happens. But I mean, our purpose, and I really mean this absolutely sincerely, our real purpose of it is to enable those opportunity areas to get spotted so that those conversations with the landowners and the people who are operating things on that land can be approached perhaps by the Wildlife Trust or by others through the Land Act and things. And then I think it would give a chance for them to see that, if something different was done here, it would facilitate something to happen at a much wider scale. And that might be very motivating, I think, and also mechanisms for enabling funding to be released and support to be given to that. So I think it will really help zoom in on some of those conversations in a way that we haven't perhaps had previously.
Definitely. We're at 3 o'clock. I'll take one last question.
Shouldn't be me. I've already asked.
Okay. I'll thank you, Simon. Maybe you could ask it separately afterwards. So we're at 3 o'clock. May I thank all of our speakers and the panel. Again reiterate, thank you all so much for coming. Your engagement in this project is critical. We're incredibly grateful that you're putting your time and your energy into it. So please do keep engaging with us. And I should also just say a massive thank you to Daniel, who's put this event together today, and to all the colleagues from the Wildlife Trust who have been here supporting in various roles. I felt quite uncomfortable earlier because Andrew was in the kitchen offering tea with somebody else, which is unheard of because I always do that. If some of you would like to come along to the recorders meeting, which will be here in February, then do look out for that because the recorders meeting is always fabulous. But otherwise, yes, a big thanks to Dan, a big thanks to colleagues at the Wildlife Trust, and thank you for coming. Thanks very much.